Welcome, everyone. Really glad so many people in the call. I hope you all had breakfast or are having breakfast. I had breakfast this morning, so I don't have to chew while presenting. I want to give you a short intro on ADC, the company I work for and I'm representing. Then I will go to a quality framework for AI assistants or AI chatbots that we developed internally, and it's still somewhat under construction. Two colleagues of mine started on this, I think 2 months ago, and I continued on it for this presentation, and because I've been doing some work on AI assistants. So there's probably a lot of valuable feedback to gather from this group. I try to keep it quite conceptual, and please, let's make it interactive. So if it becomes too technical or I'm throwing around terms that you don't know or something's unclear, please just open up the mic and ask me, or you could ask in the chat and I'll try to answer as best as I can. To shortly introduce ADC, we're a data and AI consultant. ADC actually stands for Amsterdam Data Collective originally. It originates from Amsterdam. I'm also from Amsterdam. I've been with this company for 4 years. We're around 200 people, and we most of them are based in Amsterdam, with a fairly big office in Copenhagen as well. And we have a somewhat smaller branch in Stockholm. We're around 10 people. But of course, we have growth ambitions. So that's also a reason that I moved here last September to bring bring my expertise to this office and help the office grow as well. So I'm really glad to be able to introduce ADC to you. This slide is a somewhat general intro text, but what I want to highlight is that we have a goal of doing 100% projects that matter. So trying to always make a positive impact with the data and AI consultancy work that we do. And the way we do this is we're always trying to bridge the gap between strategy, consultancy, and data science and data engineering. So we love to do strategy projects. Recently we've been doing a lot of projects where we help companies come up with a strategy to start using AI and help them build a roadmap of implementation and use cases, and that we will call a strategy project. But then ideally, we'd also help them implement those and build the data infrastructure needed and build, say, AI assistants or data science use case that they would like to have. And we have people with distinct capabilities within those fields. We do this over a couple of sectors, the most prominent of which are financial services, public, life sciences, and transport. Those are the biggest. There we have the biggest clients with the most traction. And in Stockholm until now, it's mostly the public sector actually. But we do have expertise in those other sectors as well, and people that have specific domain expertise in those sectors are looking to grow in those as well. As I said, we're over slightly over 200 people, and in total we've had 120 plus organization that we've worked for. So in this image, you'll see a couple of Swedish ones, such as Veenkamp, a lot of Dutch organizations, and more international ones. That's the really short intro on ADC. If anyone has a question already, please do ask. Or contact me later if you want to get in touch, of course. To get to the AI Assistant Quality Framework, I think the title of the talk was actually Chatbot Quality Framework, but I adjusted it yesterday to AI Assistant because I realized a lot of the examples that I have, some of the examples that I have are not, it's not necessarily always a customer-facing chatbot. It can also be an internal AI assistant. So I prefer the term AI Assistant actually. But the framework that we created is the following. So we have 6 dimensions: answer quality, conversational ability, user experience, performance, functionality, and security. And these are the dimensions under which we believe we can gather all the requirements for a high quality chatbot or AI assistant. And we want to use this framework, or we are using this framework for a couple of things. It helps us in our development of AI assistants, which we've been doing a lot lately and currently. It helps us in talking to clients about the quality of their chatbots, so both in business development conversations or when we're helping them enhance their AI assistants. And it enables us to do some benchmarking as well. And I think this is a really nice plot to show initially. So the benchmark could look like this. So this is a radar plot, which has the 6 dimensions that you see on the left. And then for each of so in this presentation, I'll go through each of these dimensions and go through the metrics that we can measure here, or the subjects that you can look at, and the metrics that you can use to measure those subjects. And that by actually measuring those metrics for a certain chatbot or AI assistant, you can make it measurable. You can actually look at the metrics and then compare chatbots with each other, which I think opens up a lot of room for discussion and really helps if you're talking about the quality of chatbots or AI assistants with a client you're working for. So the way I want to structure this is I don't want to only talk about this quality framework because it's a bit dry, but for each of these dimensions, I want to shortly go through them and make sure that we're on the same page of what these subjects actually mean. And then for each of these dimensions, I have one example of an actual project that we've worked on, how we've implemented something, and shortly go through the example. So there's a total of 6 examples, and for each of the one for each of the dimensions. To start with answer quality. So what does answer quality mean in this framework, or in the when you're talking about AI assistants? Of course, a really important one is the answer relevance. So how relevant is the answer that you get? Does it align with the user's question or intent? The answer accuracy, is the answer factually correct and precise based on a ground truth? Groundedness. So this is especially important if you're building a RAG chatbot, which in my view, most of the AI assistants we'll talk about are RAG based, which is of course retrieval augmented generation, where you enable the AI assistant to interact with a database or a vector database, actually, with, or more conceptually, a knowledge base of information that you wanted to use as context to answer questions that it's faced with. Then there's answer variability. So you would want, if users have similar questions, you would want the answer to always be not exactly the same, but the intent and the answer should be similar. And this is something that you can measure, of course. And source referencing. So if the chatbot has a knowledge base, it bases its answers on, it's really nice if you can actually see the source as a user, if you can really see the source where it's taking its information from and verify the information yourself, and don't rely solely on the intelligence of the AI behind the chatbot. Are there any questions on this, or perhaps remarks or additions that you would like to make? If it's clear to everyone, I will just go to the first example that I have. So I think one of the most important things in this step is actually data quality, which is not maybe the first thing you think of when you're talking about RAG-based AI assistants. But we've really seen that it's, if you make a first version of an AI chatbot, you can do with sort of the standard settings and just feeding it a lot of textual information, and you can be surprised by the quality of the response sometimes. But then if you want to do a second iteration where you actually improve the quality of the answers significantly. It's really important to think about the quality of the data that the quality of the data and the structure of the information that you give the chatbot access to. And to illustrate what I mean by this, I made this table with a couple of components. So, for example, formatting. If you're optimizing for RAG procedures, it really helps if all documents are really clearly structured with headers, subheaders, and bullet points. It's easier for an individual to read, but also easier for an AI assistant to gather the meaning and the essence of the paragraph that it's looking at. Something that we've also seen is really important is that you're really clear, or that you're able to determine which data or which information is actually usable for external use. So if we're talking about a chatbot that's client-facing, then it's really important that, of course, you only give it information that's supposed to be for available for the client. And what we've seen, for example, is if you're building a chatbot for customer service, that a lot of important information that you want the chatbot to be able to interact with is, for example, guides that have been made for customer service employees. But then those guides are, of course, for internal use and contain information that's not necessarily useful for the chatbot to communicate to the end user, which is external. And then if you're preparing the information for the RAG procedure, it's really important that you are able to split that well. And with the example that I just gave with customer service guides, it's not it needs some preparation, so you need to split it yourself. Each section should be self-explanatory. So ideally, this goes a bit together with the chunking strategy, where you choose the size of the chunks of information that the chatbot actually looks at when you ask it a question, and it retrieves from the vector database. But the quality really improves if you make sure that the chatbot has ample information to base this question on, of course. And then what we've seen, especially with the growing context length that a lot of the LLMs that you use in the background have, is that ideally you give it a full paragraph. But then, of course, it's important that paragraphs are not too long and that's clearly structured. And then, even then, it's really important that you think about how what information is in those paragraphs, and you want those paragraphs to be as self-explanatory as possible. And this is something that you can prepare and edit, of course, when you're preparing data for a RAG procedure. And then I thought a nice addition, something we've run into, sometimes documents contain a lot of images. And then a solution to handle images is that you actually prepare textual data that describe the images. So you use a vision model. For example, GPT-4 is able to process images as well, and then give you a description instead of, and then you feed that to the vector database instead of the image itself. And this list could go on and on, but these are the first 5 examples that came to mind. Then we go to conversational ability. So we have chat history awareness. Of course, we all know with ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other big ones that there is a persistence in the history. So if you have a conversation and it becomes a long conversation, and it's usually able to remember what you actually talked about at the start of that conversation. It's really nice if an external facing chatbot has this possibility as well. Then there's ambiguity detection. What can be really annoying if you're interacting with a chatbot is if it doesn't pick up on ambiguity and doesn't ask follow-up questions to clear the vagueness in your question. So I will have a example on that actually in the next slide. Natural language understanding. So would be great if it's able to understand you even if you speak a bit unclearly or you have typos or slang, and this is also something you can measure, of course. And especially as a Dutch person in Sweden that's learning Swedish, but it's still quite still somewhat on a basic level. I've been doing some testing on chatbots, and it's not always the case that they are able to respond in English. So it is really nice if the chatbot, the external facing chatbot, is actually able to switch languages if you ask it. To talk a bit more about ambiguity detection, so how we have solved this in one of our projects, requires actually a multi-agent setup. And to shortly introduce what that means, I think a lot of people here do know that, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Multi-agent means that you have several instances of calls to an LLM. So each of we have the small example graph on the right, and each of these gray boxes is actually let's call it a bot that interacts with an LLM. So there's an intelligent LLM between behind the orchestrator, behind the response generator, the reviewer, and the classifier. And then the final response is, of course, just what you get in the user interface. And as a user, you don't necessarily need to know that there are several calls to an API, for example. But in the background, this usually is the case. So if you want to detect ambiguity, it really helps if you do this setup where you have an orchestrator that evaluates the question and then decides whether to respond directly, and then it follows the line straight down and goes directly to review response and output the response. It can go to the RAG procedure if, in this case, the orchestrator decides that the answer is clear enough, and retrieve the information that it needs, and then generate a response, review the response, and output the response. But if the orchestrator is tasked with detecting ambiguity as well, and you do this by just instructing it through the system prompt, you can instruct it to ask clarifying questions, and then it goes to the clarification bot on the right. And this bot is its sole task is to come up with a couple of questions that could clear up the ambiguity that has been detected, and then ask those questions instead of answering. So to make this a bit more illustrative, we have implemented this for a large pension provider in the Netherlands, actually, where an example conversation could be, so the external user logs in and wants to use how large a pension is that they will receive. And of course, for the person in the context that they're in, it might be obvious what they mean, but this could actually mean several things. So it could be that they're asking about a projected future pension when they're in their 20s, and they want to know whether they should put in more money on a monthly basis, or whether it's fine, the current payout, or the method to calculate the pension. And then the orchestrator detects this ambiguity in the context that it's in, and comes up with a clarifying question, which is, would you like to know your estimated pension at retirement, your current pension payout, or how your pension is calculated? And then the user can clear up the ambiguity by saying, I want to know my estimated pension at retirement. To go to the next dimension, I see that the time is going a bit faster than I thought, even though it's just me talking, but I'll try to speed up a bit so that we have ample time for questions. User experience. So what we mean here is tone of voice. So it's really nice if the chatbot has a certain distinct personality or tone of voice. If it's able to show empathy, if the readability is high, which means that the output is clearly structured, simple to read, and easy to comprehend. The response length is appropriate, so that the answers are not too short or too long, and that user feedback is gathered. To give an example of how you could adjust the tone of voice, it's a relatively straightforward one, but you can do this by giving the chatbot responsible for answering a system prompt where you give it a persona, actually. And there's loads of templates that you can find online, and this is just the first part of a template that I found and we have used for a banking customer service, so facing chatbot. And it clearly describes a role that this chatbot has, or that it should fulfill, communication style, personality, and the list is a lot longer, actually. But you can add a lot of information on how the bot should behave and how it should answer, and whether it should use bullets, for example, and how it should respond to certain types of questions. And this enables you to give a distinct tone of voice to your AI assistant. Performance. So, of course, there's the first thing that a technical person might think of is scalability. How well does it scale? Is it able to handle a lot of simultaneous use? And of course, to measure this, you need to have either access to the infrastructure. So when you're working on this yourself, it's really valuable to think of this. It's a bit harder to measure this for a chatbot where you do not have access to the full infrastructure, but then you could think of testing it in a way by simulating or starting several chats at once, or but this is something especially useful if you're developing it yourself. Adaptability. So ideally, some chatbots should be able to adapt to different domains, user needs, or organizational goals, and it's able to detect when it should do that. Response time and latency. Of course, we've all seen chatbots that are not quick to respond, and that can be really annoying. Ideally, you want it to start speaking immediately after you answer. Especially with RAG procedures, of course, there can be some latency, but this is a very measurable, quantitative metric. And continuous learning. So it would be great if a chatbot is able to pick up on past interactions and improve. And this is also something that you can actually develop and implement. Example that I have here is actually on adaptability. So this is something I've worked on recently for a public organization here in Sweden. And they're responsible for distributing funds, public funds, to companies that are innovative in certain areas that are important for strategically for the country that we're in. And this public organization has historically had a lot of programs where they fund companies and projects, and an example of this program can be stimulating the advance of AI by distributing funds to companies that are actually innovative in this field. Another program can be around another technology. And we helped them by developing a AI assistant that interacts with all that program data. And you have to imagine that program data is a lot of textual information. So there can be thousands of projects and companies under a program that generate a lot of textual information through, for example, evaluations by the companies themselves, or questionnaires, or evaluations by this organization that's distributing the funds. And there's actually so much information that they historically haven't been able to use this very well in evaluations that they do. So, of course, if you're distributing funds, it's really important to look at the impact that your funds have. And there are methods for this, but these do not always use all this all this information, that textual information that's actually available. So we help them develop a methodology where they have an internal AI assistant to actually interact with that program information. And we set this up in a modular way. We decided to start small, as is always a good decision when you're building any data science application. So we built this first for one of the programs. And we came up with a way that worked quite well, where we leveraged some metadata to be able to query the semi-structured data and generate a response and check the validity. So this is each of these modules that you see, each of these programs is actually a multi-agent setup that we've tested and works quite well within that program. And then we decided to combine the programs by setting up in a modular way where you can easily add other programs. And then we enable the organization to actually scale this out when they have new information. So we can easily add new programs as well. On the functionality, we've got 4 subjects: tool integration, escalation, multimodality, and user personalization. So of course, tool integration, we all know from chatbots that we interact with on a daily basis, but it can be really valuable if a chatbot has access to, is able to search the internet, for example, or there's a list of tools that you could integrate in these assistants. We think it's really important to always keep a human in the loop, and there's a possibility for escalation. So if you're talking to a client-facing chatbot that's responsible for answering questions as a customer service agent, it's really nice if you're running into limitations of that chatbot, that you're easily able to escalate to an actual employee. Multimodality, so it's of course can be really useful if you're able to use images or upload text or PDF documents as well. And user personalization, so adopt responses based on user history, preference, or profile data. And that's actually the example that I have is focused on user personalization. So we talked earlier about this pension fund that we worked with. But the first phase we're currently delivering is actually focused on is a RAG-based chatbot that's able to answer questions on general pension information. So there can be loads of technical questions that you have on your pension that do not need personal information, but just documentation around pensions that this pension fund has. And this first version that we developed only has access to that, so quite general but specific pension information. The second version that we're going to develop, and that's just starting, is that we add personal information. And of course, this can be a bit tricky because this is usually structured in over several databases, and you need to figure out how to give the chatbot access to it in a secure way. But how we envision we're going to do this is that for each client, we prepare a file, basically, where all the information is gathered for that individual that we deem relevant for the chatbot to have access to, structured in a way that's easily readable for the AI with a RAG procedure, and that a user has to log in, and then the AI is able to view that file and only that file. And of course, it's really important that it only outputs information on that individual, and the vetting of data and validating of the answer is even more important than if you're answering general pension questions, because you need to make sure that communicated information on specific personal information is 100% correct. Final dimension, security. So we all know probably a couple of examples of prompt injections. And there's ways especially in this multi-agent setup, there's relatively straightforward ways to protect your AI assistant to this. Off-topic safeguards, where you want your chatbot to be grounded on a certain topic. So, for example, pension information, you don't want it to answer coding questions, for example. You want the chatbot to have a certain goal and only answer questions around that goal. Bias mitigation, of course, you want. Depends a bit on the company, but you want certain biases to be to not be reflected in the answers that the chatbot gives. And regulatory compliance and ethical AI. Of course, in any project, it's really important to take the regulatory frameworks that you need to adhere to into account. And of course, recently AI Act is really important. So for chatbots, this concretely means that it always needs to be clear that you're talking to an AI agent and not to a person. But there's also GDPR and other frameworks that you need to adhere to, of course. Just to showcase one more example that we've actually implemented, this is a chatbot that we built for an organization that's responsible for informal caregivers and distributing information to informal caregivers. And informal care is if you, as an individual, care for someone close to you. So say a relative becomes ill or is elderly and can't take care of him or herself completely, then at least in the Netherlands, you can become an informal caregiver, and this means that you can also you're not able to work 100% anymore for a certain time, and then there's funds that you could have access to. But regulation around this is not always easy to comprehend and understand, especially if you're in that situation where you suddenly need to spend a lot of time caring for your relative. And then this organization wants to make that information as accessible as possible. So they asked us to create a chatbot that is able to interpret all the information, all the internal information that they have, and answer questions around informal care that anyone might have. And this is online. I could share a link with you and you could test it out. But you immediately spot, if you look at this screenshot, is that even though I asked a question in English, it answers in Dutch. So it's not so easy for all of you to understand probably. And therefore, there is one metric where this chatbot wouldn't score very highly, and that is it's only able to currently answer in one question. But we're actually updating it relatively soon, and then it will adapt to the language that the user uses actually. What I want to show here is actually how we made sure that jailbreaking is not possible. So we put in quite a lot of safeguards. Again, this is a multi-agent setup, and there's agents specifically responsible for making sure that the conversation only revolves around relevant topics. And what you see here, that I took a prompt injection example that I found on the internet, which is called DAC, or I also saw DAN. But it's basically sort of a role playing where you tell the AI assistant or the chatbot that it needs to behave as a certain personality, and this personality is a professional black hat hacker. And apparently this works quite well on some chatbots, but what you can see in Dutch, the response that the chatbot has is, "Thanks for your question. Unfortunately, I can't help you with this specific question because it's not within my area of expertise." And currently this chatbot is actually so grounded, the safeguards are so strong that this happens quite often, even if you have a question that maybe requires some creative answer that's a bit outside of the actual information or the knowledge that we've given this chatbot. And we're of the opinion that it's currently a bit too strict, so we're loosening it up a bit actually. But we've seen that this has been tested. So this is in production, and it's been tested quite extensively, and It is in production because the compliance department wasn't able to find any objection. They weren't able to crack it, so to say. They weren't able to get an answer out of it that they wouldn't want the chatbot to give. So that was a big success. That was the presentation. Slightly over time, but we still have 20 minutes for questions or discussion. So very curious to hear if you have any questions or points of discussion.